you. And thank you guys for inviting me back. I told Natalie, I said that's how you know that you did okay the first time if they asked you
Mm.
back. If they didn't, then they never asked you to come back. But I wanted to, before I, took us into our musical performance, I wanted to call on each facilitator to share what was talked about in their groups. And I will start with Ms. Borneo just because she left everybody behind. And so I think that it's okay if she leads us in this. So, Ms. Borneo, please kick us off.
Dalvin, we just use the term weaponizing. Thank you
Yes.
for, yeah. No,
Mhm.
it is my pleasure. And I do want to apologize to my group because we didn't get to round out our conversation. I was midstream when my hand slipped. So anyway, we had great conversation. And at the end of the day, our lesson learned there was dialogue and the importance of really having authentic conversation. And so we started with reflections of a childhood experience, brother and sister, where the sister did the traditional tap class, and the brother from an African American family did not play basketball. He actually was a tumbler. And that was a wow. We had amazing parents who were willing to let both of these young people go in any direction that they felt. They were very supportive. And so there were no negative barriers and things put in place. It was a good evolving experience. And then we talked about another experience where every little girl wants to be a princess, growing up to be a princess and saved by, the knight on the horse. But as a young adult or getting into the dating scene, being told, don't be the princess who needs to be saved. Make sure you have your money, pay your own way. Do not expect him to pick up the tab. But getting a little older and looking for that Mr. Right, make sure he can provide for you, take care of you. And so we have this situational expectation based on what people believe needs to happen or what the norms are, the roles for male and female, which seem to like be this pendulum going back and forth, right? Exhausting, would make you really crazy, especially if as our like our opening speaker shared, you know what side of the pendulum you want to be on, and you want to stay there. And so it's interesting because those norms go into the way we're disciplined. Perhaps a father will go into this back and forth dialogue with a daughter, but my son should never speak back to me because I'm the man of the house, right? This macho thing where I'm going to knock you out if you respond to me. It's looking at, wow, we never looked at things with this kind of lens before and seeing where this has actually weaved itself into our lives, these gender norms. Um, we also had someone in the room who's very familiar with our opening speaker, and really reflected on his own experience of growing up with having a favorite toy as a young boy. He loved a Shira toy. I hope I said that correctly. And one of his reflections was, I remember as a young boy trying to take a picture, and I had this action figure somewhat concealed because in my mind, I realized that I probably shouldn't have this, especially in a picture. This was not good. But it was the toy that he loved and enjoyed. We came to this conversation about weaponizing truths and the fact that we all have these biases. They're situational, they're long-term, short-term. But if we as individuals could learn how to give grace to things that are different, recognizing that we are all connected, right? Our last conversation was about mass incarceration, and we realized that it affects generations, whole families, not just one person. And it's the same thing. Every decision I make impacts you. And so instead of the mob mentality where we are armed to the teeth to maim and injure people who are different, maybe we should find some grace and learn how to process things differently. We are all shaped by our preferences, our cultures, our experiences. So on that first date, maybe we should start to get to know who Dalbin is. And so we won't be outraged if Dalbin goes in to try to do the peck at the end of the date, and we won't feel like we are being stereotyped. And just recognizing that what we do as humans is sometimes we go to extremes. And everything is, we can rationally think about things and figure out what position people take and why. And that's the way our society should work. That's the way we coexist, cohabitate, cooperate, and successfully thrive as human beings. So let's go back to humanity first. Stop weaponizing truths. Truth is truth. Our speaker told us his truth, and it gave us an opportunity to go through his journey and see how he's arrived at the fact that I like who I am.
It was beautiful, Ms. Borneo. And actually, I think that that's a perfect segue to Ms. Faley, because I had the pleasure of being in that group, and there was a lot of talk about humanity. And I think your point ties in greatly to something that Ms. Faley will say. So I will pass the baton to you, Ms. Faley, and speak for our group.
You're on mute, Ms. Faley.
The first thing was, don't draw your circle of family small. We're all human beings, be inclusive. And every person in the group was raised by a mom, a strong mom who could do anything. And I think that's a really good point, is to know that men and women can do anything, and their roles are fluid. And but I did think about this, and it wasn't mentioned so much in the group, that it's very, like when a mom doesn't want you to do something, like when my grandson dyed his hair blue, I was very upset about that because it would make him different and he would be criticized. And I remember being a mom of children and saying, I don't want them to be different because I don't want them to be hurt. I don't want them to be criticized. So it's difficult to think about giving the wings and letting them fly, but it's not difficult if you don't think about it, if you just do it. And it seems like each person in the group said that. I specifically have to give credit to Dalbin, who has a daughter, and he's the father to the daughter and adores his little 2-year-old daughter. And he had the courage to leave, to go to Washington, to be on his own. And that's the other thing, is the realization that you have your own journey. You can stay connected with that very large family, but you have your own personal journey. And I really think that in the case of our group, every mom gave the courage to be on that different journey, even though they can be very sad about your leaving. I mean, I'm sad that my son's in New Jersey and he's not going to be here for Christmas, but I gave permission to do that. I didn't say stay. So that sort of thing. It was a beautiful, wonderful group. I'd like to stay connected for another couple of hours or days or weeks. Thank you, Dalbin.
No problem. And once this is all over, I promise you, I will buy each of you an alcoholic beverage of your choice, unless you don't drink. Then it
just stay connected in some
we will
email or something, because it was just a beautiful statement about family, and that idea that your circle of family should be huge, and that support, and that's what was emphasized in our group. It was lovely.
Dr. Clifton, you were a facilitator, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So I will go to you now.
Okay, thank you. I facilitated in a wonderful group where people really shared deeply from their experience of their families. And they varied. But we started off by talking about how what we grow up in our families and the values and prejudice that we see, really goes back to relating to what we started this whole experience with, looking at injustice and looking at racial prejudice. And it bases, but if our family gives us one side and we can have the courage to look at other sides, it can help us move towards accepting everyone. And that's what we really need at this time. But we had someone presented a family in which they grew up where there was a very negative male, very strong mother. There wasn't a father, and men were looked upon as very weak and irresponsible. So that stamps, puts a prism on one's life, and people evolve out of it. And we had another person who shared growing up in a family of matriarchal dominance, of really strong, vibrant women with not a lot of men around. The men seemed to disappear for whatever reasons. And the women were able to take over all the roles, whatever it was, male or female, if we traditionally thought of it that way. And then we had another family talked about where it was very clear that a man is responsible. We can take all the loving and help from a woman, from a mother who is strong, caring, loving. But when it comes down to it, he grew up saying, we are responsible to take care of women. Not in a kind of patronizing way, but just a total expectation. So the dialogue between these three visions were really, no one was arguing for right or wrong, but it really brought out the profound differences of how we evolve in whatever set of circumstances we are, and how do we move towards, accepting who we are. Sometimes resistance can help us get stronger. Sometimes it can weaken us. But it's the journey that people move towards, accepting and hopefully loving themselves. But it's based on the values that they have to struggle to find in themselves, that what was really important. And, living one's truth, as the speaker, said, is what is a high value. And if you're living your truth, you can't actually condemn anybody for being who they are. And then society would be much more ideal. So it was a pleasure to be involved in this group. Thank you.
And that was beautifully said, Dr. Clifton. Mm-hmm. And you're right. If we all lived in our truths, then how do we walk a path of judgment towards somebody else living theirs? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And last but certainly not least, right, is Mr. Brett. Did I say it right?
Mr. What?
Did I say your last name right, or did I butcher it?
Let's say you said it okay.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good.
And then, so I had a terrific group sharing many thoughts from a range of, I would say, generations. And I think that was very interesting because it really provided multiple aspects and facets of the problem. But I think we kick-started the conversation with a sense of self. And the question started by saying, when we are young and we are being told, you're a girl, you're a boy, you should do this, you should do that, as our intro speaker said, what does that mean? I mean, that gender is, after all, a thing of our mind, because apart from, and, I guess our participants said beyond genitalia and reproduction, what makes us different? It's really nothing. I mean, we see and we are interested in things around us, and really it's the way that the parents put us perhaps in box or redirect us that makes us different. But otherwise, we are fascinated by nature. We are fascinated by the beauty that surrounds us. We ask questions. We find things playful. And so this what is more important is really that we start to see each other as human beings, not as a gender, binary box, or I would say binary jailed person, but really like what comes from inside. And this went even a little bit further by saying something that initially I thought, am I going to say this in a plenary session? But I actually thought it's a good thing. And the person said, we should see the world as children. And every day is Halloween. People are dressed up. People do whatever they want. If a woman wants to wear a beard, or a man a dress, or having painted nails, or a wig, that's fine. Just look again at the world around you as we have started as children to appreciate, and that we forgot because we were forced in those two boxes. But another interesting point was perhaps a kind of a binary split between gender as well. Because if we think about it, women have broken the dress code barrier, right? If you see a woman walking in the street wearing a pant and or a suit, nobody is going to really notice. They are going to say, wow, very stylish, a businesswoman. But see a businessman going to his work with a dress. How is that going to be accepted? It's not, and we all know it. So there is a definite difference, and the problem and the intensity on the male side is perhaps even more pronounced. And so that was interesting because then we also touch base, and I'll come back to this, but we touch base also on the dating scene. So, and saying that, sometimes the Gen Z dating would like to see men perhaps more in touch with their emotion. In one way, they say that they are, but on the other hand, then the dating happens and there is again this assumption of where I should fit. I should take care of this, I should open the door, I should pay the bill or whatever else, and you name it. There is this assumption, and it just all split everything. And one way to express that is that already in a dating scene, we are already fighting with trying to understand all the emotions that are unraveling inside us. But in addition of that, we're actually pressured from the outside to be dealing with this two-box kind of world. And so what a terrible thing. And again, we came back on this idea that, well, if we do see ourselves as being human beings first, expressing themselves in a different way, then things would be much better. But we also try to address the second set of questions, which is, how do we change that exactly? What can we do? And it was not clear that we had an answer, but we touched on a few things. And one thing which was trend. I mean, again, in Gen Z, Gen Y, the e-boy trendy thing is something that perhaps may expose people to a very different outlook of what a man or a woman looks like. So for people who do not know, the e-boy and the e-girl are people dressed, boys dressed with earrings and nail painted in black, perhaps a little bit like between goths, and perhaps what you see a bit more in East Asia, which is one of the person in our group said. I myself expressed that, when I visited Japan, I would see a large and wide variety of how men dress. But let us not be fooled, because even in East Asia, while you see a fluidity in your appearance, the role is even more so pronounced. So we were back into what is in our mind is the first thing to resolve. What is in our mind has to be the comfortable part of ourselves and expressing ourselves. And then we also talked about, famous people. Marilyn Manson comes out and doesn't, as a singer, appear to be so odd. Yes, sure, you will always have group that will say, the devil, Marilyn Manson, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of fun. It becomes very natural, and that basically changed the society. But it has like a double edge, because we also talked about the fact that, for people that have been struggling to express themselves and got that, perhaps stone in their face or slap in their face or whatever. It's annoying. They say, oh, because that person is famous, that person can do that, can break all barriers, can come painted, can come with earring, can come as a, you know, with an androgynous look, but I cannot because I'm going to be figure pointed. So there was this kind of jealousy and this kind of like, yes, but at the end we recognize that's a good thing, because tattoos at the time of my parents, for example, were an absolute no. I mean, someone coming for a tattoo and trying to find a job would not get a job. Today, who cares? I mean, you know, you are surrounded by people that are tattooed. It may even be a fashion statement. So at the end, I think that we realize that this acceptance come also by sometimes those trends or those famous people, and we felt like it was okay. Although that, of course, the first thing is for all of us is to be functioning from a place of love. We need to have an awakening and start to see each other as we are inside as well as outside. And moreover, it is all in the mind. So thank you.
That was beautifully said, and I think, you know, when we were asked what kind of energy we were bringing into the room, the one that I said was love, right? Because I think that if we loved each other a little bit more, right, then I think we'd see some of this progress even speed up, right? Because we'd be less inclined to sit here and just judge each other for what we have. So in closing, before we transition to the musical guest, I wanted to leave you guys with this, right? And Ms. Faley talked about how when she first became and she's from Texas, and when she first became a teacher, she remembered exactly how the school staff that was working with her was integrated, but the classroom was not, right? So when we talk about the worlds that we are trying to fix, for lack of a better word, right, we have to remember that that world isn't that far removed from the one that we live in now. Right. So any progress that we've seen, we've all lived through it. Right. Like, so, you know, Jerome mentioned Marilyn Manson and her tattoos. Right. Like, that's something that in the 90s wasn't a thing. It wasn't allowed to just have tattoos all over your body. You weren't taken seriously. And now I'll tell you this, I have a tattoo on my forearm, and I'm a program manager overseeing grants. That wouldn't have been a thing that happened in the 90s. Right. Ms. Borneo, you work for Dress for Success. Right. Like, we're talking about how women dressed in the 90s for success was not the same thing that we have now when women are dressed for success, right? And so I think it's important that as we stop that. My dog is barking. As we look at racial and social justice, as we look at all these things, right? One, we are very quick to condemn white supremacy when it happens as extreme, right? That is the extreme. That is the worst of the worst. But we are not as quick to denounce the violence against women that usually accompanies white supremacy. And racism only benefits racists, right? There is nobody else that benefits from that, no matter what kind of nonsense women have been fed into thinking that they should be a part of the patriarchy. It does not benefit them. As we see now, you know, Ms. Faley mentioned this in our group, we're about to have a woman vice president, and the people who had the biggest issue with that were women, right? It was women that were like, no, women cannot crack that glass ceiling, right? And that's because they've been conditioned, they've been beaten into believing that if they just uphold white supremacy and the patriarchy, they too will benefit from it. The other part, and this connects to something that Omar said, when we talk about undoing these bands of trauma and we talk about destroying white supremacy, you cannot expect a man to have the elasticity to undo white supremacy when he spent his entire childhood being beaten down to be this kind of man. Right? Because the man that he is constantly told to be is a man that continues to benefit from violence, from anger, from control, from domination. And so as we do this work, I've never sat in front of a man and seen them hurt, and their first instinct is to allow that hurt to come out. Their first instinct is to push that hurt down, right? Because that's what they've been taught to do. So then when things hit the fan and you're suddenly in all this pain because of everything that's happened, you lean on the anger. You don't lean on the love and the nurturing and the acceptance that people have given you. The other part of it too is that as we see this world change, we've all talked about changes that have happened over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years. The world itself is fluid. We need to love the fluidity in everybody else too. And that is my end. Thank you guys for letting me sit and come and spend this Friday evening with you. I will now pass it over to the incomparable Nalini to introduce the musical number. Thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome.
Thank you.